welcome back to just another football podcast. This week it's myself and Harry again. It's the end of the season at last. As a Chelsea fan, well, thank fuck that is over. Probably shouldn't be swearing so early into this, but it's been that sort of season. Good season in all for you though. In the end, Harry did a nice win right at the end.
I know we played our typical sort of final last day of the season stuff. Really, we're very good on the last day of the season when there's pretty much nothing to play for ever. Seemingly, I certainly can't remember one in recent years where there's been anything to play for, and we seem to do rather well under those circumstances. So yeah, nice little 5-0 win in the sun. Enjoyed it very much, mate. A few beverages, a little bit too much sun. Feeling the effects of that today. A little bit sunburnt today, but. No, it was a good weekend. Enjoyed it. Good end to the season. More than we can say, I suppose, for some of our relegation counterparties, certainly.
Yeah. I'll just a quick rundown what we're going to cover in this episode. We're going to do the relegation. We're going to talk about now. We'll touch on the events that happened in the Bundesliga, and then sadly, we're going to go through our pre-season predictions. Which they went slightly better for some than others, but given how mad this season is, I don't think any of us have come out looking great, but we'll get into it. One of the big shocks on the last day of the season and the season as a whole, Leicester. They're going down after winning the Premier League only a few years ago, though, as it was pointed out, there's not too many in the side left from it. Well, what do you think went wrong for them this season, Harry?
It's a good question because you when you think of their struggles, you'd probably extend it back to last season. I had to sort of do a double take because I thought last season they'd actually finished a lot lower in the table than what they actually had. They finished 8th last year, which is like unbelievable to think that at the time was considered a pretty disastrous season for them, and yet that was sort of lower top half of the table, which when you think about it, they were battling for top 4 for a couple of years. They obviously won an FA Cup. I would actually argue they were probably a more rounded side in that period, certainly than when they won the league. And I know that's kind of maybe a controversial claim to make, but they sustained it over a longer period of time. They were clearly one of the better teams in the league. And you look at the core of that side, you mentioned the core of the title-winning side isn't there anymore, but a lot of the players from that team are still there. And I suppose it kind of reflects a wider problem they've sort of had in the last couple of years, which is replacing certain players and knowing when to move them on at the right time, and then also replace them with the right signings. I think when you go through their signings over the last couple of seasons, it's hard to argue that any of them have been an unquantified success.
I've actually got their transfer window up here from this year. So the big ones were Wesley Fofana going and Kasper Schmeichel. They only got 1 million.
I think
they only got £1 million for Schmeichel, which is like it's understandable. He's was he 36 or so, and I think his contract was running out. So, but to try and replace him like this to get the same quality, it's near impossible. But they didn't even seem to try to do that to replace him. And they didn't sign anybody. Went with Danny Ward and I can't remember what's the other guy's name. Everton, yeah. And then they got in Faz. What is that one? And he's done okay for them. At times he scored on the last day, didn't he? And but he
scored a couple of own goals. I think that's the problem. You sort of when you do a couple of high profile things, resulting in goals for the opposition, like he did in one game. I think that is something you're then always going to be associated with, no matter your performances for the rest of the season. But as you say, I think when you look at that business, it really wasn't enough for them. You know, they were losing one of their better players in Fofana, even if he's not exactly lit it up for Chelsea so far. I think you could certainly say
he was brilliant for them.
Players. Yeah, and he's not been replaced adequately. I think when you look at their last couple of windows, I think that there's been a sort of there's been financial difficulty at the club for a while because they haven't been able to sort of spend the amount of money that you would have expected them to, not just to stay in the league, but actually last
Hmm.
season you say like sort of consolidate a push for Europe, and they didn't really do that. They kind of stood still as other teams got better.
Hmm.
Um, I think it's difficult because I think there's loyalty to the players that got them there, which I do
Yeah.
understand. But and the manager, I think you can sort of extend this back to maybe keeping Brendan Rodgers for too long this season, and whether it was right to replace him with Dean Smith is kind of another argument in itself. But I
Mm-hmm.
think Brendan, he, even though as I mentioned they finished eighth last season,
Hmm.
it was a tumultuous season. I think that clearly it was the sign of a man who'd reached a sort of a glass ceiling at the project, and I think there's a few examples of him doing this now. Like, I think
Yeah.
not least at Liverpool, where he took them close, but once he'd done that, he kind of was never able to kick on and go again. And I think there was just a clear, tangible evidence of this at Leicester. Now, I didn't think that would drag them into a relegation scrap this season. I must be honest with
No.
you. Like, I didn't have them. Well, we'll come to our predictions later. I didn't have them having a great season, but I certainly wouldn't have had them down as a team that I think could go down. And I think even as the season's gone on, and they've been down, I mean, they were rock bottom at the start of the season for about 7 or 8 game weeks. Then they got themselves out of it a little bit. And I think once they did that, in my mind, it was okay. Like, they'll kick on now, and again, it will sort of be at worst a high bottom half finish.
Yeah.
I
You
certainly
were
I did
always
not
waiting for
think
them to get a result.
distance themselves. Yeah,
It was interesting. They match they brought up their results against the bottom six,
yeah,
which is sort of similar um to the Twitter account. What's the one we always reference?
the other 14.
The other 14. So similar sort of thing behind that, measuring how you do against the other 14, but except match today just brought up the bottom six, and them and Southampton had the least amount of points head to head,
Yeah,
and they had that game. Madison missing a penalty. Was that
yeah,
against Leeds? Was or
Against
Everton?
Everton, who've obviously ended up then staying up ahead of them. I mean, what a moment you could look back. I mean, that
It's
is the
it's harsh
moment,
on
isn't it?
Madison because of how good he has been for them, but
That's the moment, though. I think if he
yeah.
puts that in, and as you say, it's harsh to pin it on sort of one moment, one individual, but that's that is sort of the sliding doors moment where if that goes in and you go 3-1 up against the team that I think at the time really struggling for form, Everton.
Hmm.
I don't think they'd won away in something like since the start of the season,
Hmm.
and they end up obviously getting a draw out of that game, and they beat Brighton shortly after, and they've obviously ended up pipping them to it,
Hmm.
and that's a sickener for Leicester. That is an absolute sickener. I think, honestly, as I said, they were sort of sleepwalking towards it for a while. My general attitude towards it that they would get out of it because I thought there were three worse teams, albeit like based on what I've seen from Leicester, they probably aren't three worst. I think they've been pretty awful all season, no doubt about it. But I did think on paper there were three worse teams than them. But over the course of the season, I think I don't know if we spoke about this on here, but it was. I think the difficulty with it when you have a squad, and then the one I always come back to is Burnley under Sean Dyche,
Hmm.
where they would survive. Yeah, they end up getting relegated in the end, but they staved off multiple relegations, which they really had no right to do with the
And
players they
and
had.
also at one point they were like safe from relegation quite comfortably when, at their best. Like
They got seventh, I think. They had one
yeah.
season where they got seventh. But the point I was going to make is the actual squad they had probably was, in my mind, one of the worst ones in the league. But yeah, they knew what they were facing going into the season. They expected to be in a
Mhm.
relegation battle. I'm not going to say they relished it, but they understood kind of what was required in terms of
Mhm.
winning games, grinding out results, and sticking at it during the hard times. And I think the problem Leicester have had this season is it's almost like they're shell shocked, or they were shell shocked to have been in the position that they found themselves
Mhm.
in, especially towards the back end of the season where the pressure's on. Wins are so important.
Mhm.
I mean, you're looking
Yeah.
at that table at the bottom. None of them winning very much. It's very much if
No.
you win, you go a few places up the table.
Yeah.
And it was almost as if they couldn't cope with the sort of pressure and intensity that comes with that expectation, because there's no way their fans thought they were going to be down there. There was always this expectation that I had, and I think a lot of the wider football community had, that they would distance themselves from it. And I think that is actually a dangerous kind of attitude to have towards it if you're kind of within that group, that you're too good to go down, because you're never too good to go down. You're as
No.
good as where you are in the table. And certainly when you look at them this season, they haven't lived up to it whatsoever. And you can't argue if you get relegated with 34 points, which is what they finished on, over the course of the season, you deserve to go down. There's a couple of teams that have gone down, and you look at it and think, were they too good to go down in terms of the actual points they put up? Leicester can't argue that on this occasion, because the teams that have finished ahead of them certainly weren't tearing up trees by any means, but they just weren't good enough over the course of 38 games.
And like the thing that people keep pointing to is like there's so many people, so many of the players are out of contract. You've got Tielemans, Tete, who just came in. I forgot they signed him. He
Yeah,
didn't
in
really,
January.
he didn't really make much of an impact. Amartey, Soyuncu, Mendy, and then just going back to their transfers, the last couple of seasons. So we already talked about what they've done in the summer. The summer before that, they they had a net spend of minus 45, so spent 45 more than what they brought in. Doesn't look like they had any big sales that time. They had a they sold their Mahrez replacement Gazal for 2.6 million. But that him and another guy were the only two real signings. But in came Patson Daka, Samare, Bertrand, Vestergaard, and they had Lookman on loan that season as well. So that's the 2021 transfer or summer transfer window for Leicester. None of them have really
No,
been up to it.
not at all.
Bertrand was on a free, so you can maybe make the case for a free.
Yeah, we
He's
were
done
linked with him at
okay.
the time, and I thought, I don't want us to go anywhere near him. And Leicester at the time had finished above us in the table, so I was
At
surprised
the
by that.
time, I remember thinking that's not bad, but I was assuming Patson Daka and Tamare were going to be good players, like because they were one of the, especially Samare was he was like one of these ones that was getting hyped up by the analysts on Twitter. I was like, it gets through a lot of work for a team, but he doesn't. He just hasn't lived up to it. I think whenever you're always coming into a team or going into that Leicester team as like a workhorse midfielder, you're always going to be associated with Kante. So he
Yeah,
had a lot of
it's a lot to
living
live
up
up
to.
to.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but so they've done that, and then this season they made a profit of around 70 million. So the investment wasn't there,
no,
and then they had all these players going out, and it just hasn't made a good atmosphere. I also think Brendan Rodgers, we sort of you said it, he's had a habit of sort of after a while, I don't know if it's his ambition or what, but he just doesn't want to continue or his heart doesn't seem to be in it. He starts making noises that things aren't going right, and which is fair enough to try and demand more from your club if you don't feel like you're being backed.
yeah,
But it kind of feels like that might have all added to it all turning sour. Like if your manager's not happy and not sort of believing that he's getting back, that it can't be, that'll filter down, and it looks like it just it wasn't good enough in the end.
no,
Um,
no, not at all.
and it would seem to be like an attitude thing from an outsider looking in. But that there's so many there's like a handful of players that'll get picked off. I'm wondering, what do you think Vardy will stay?
I think at his age, he'd be doing well to get a move back to the Premier League. I can't. What's he scored? 3 goals this season? 4 goals?
Yeah,
Like,
something
it's
like
not
that.
very many at all. I think he'd stay. He's one of the ones I'd be looking at and thinking he'll feel a loyalty towards Leicester. I think, actually, in terms of sort of what has given his career, I don't think he'd want it to end like that. Now, the Championship is a different sort of entity altogether at 37
Yeah.
years old. Do you want to go through with that? I can't see him getting a move, mate. I can see some others getting a move,
Barnes.
but he isn't one
I
of
was
them. I think
surprised how good Barnes has actually done this season.
he put good numbers
13
up.
goals, 1 assist.
Yeah. There's a
Um,
player there. He's a little bit raw and rough around the edges, but there's certain parts of his game I like. I think that sort of he could be coached to, a pretty serviceable
mhm,
level. Certainly a Premier League level player if you're putting up that
yeah.
number of goals off the flank. Um, I think the other one, obviously, people will be looking at is Madison. I don't think he's been very good in the last few months of the season. And I'm not just talking about the penalty miss either. I
I
think
don't
there
think,
was that.
isn't there a stat? He's maybe only had like 1 goal since February or something like that. Or
Yeah,
I
it
think
wouldn't
it's from
surprise me.
February. His
I'm in
stats
my
have
fantasy
dropped
for
off.
a while and he's done nothing, so maybe you can sort of attribute it towards that. But
Hmm.
there was a well documented spat he had with the Leicester journalist from the Athletic who'd sort of
Yeah.
tweeted something out about their performance, I think against Brentford or someone like that, where they'd drawn. Madsen sort of bit back, and I remember saying at the time, it's just not a good look for your players to be getting involved. And it's not like he's responding to someone that's sort of being quite toxic. It was a fairly fair
Hmm.
assessment of the situation at the club, and actually, in retrospect, he's turned out to be absolutely correct in
Yeah.
what he wrote the guy, which was that they were in trouble. And when you're in a situation like that, it kind of goes back to what I was speaking about earlier about the players' heads being in the right place. Is that really what you want them investing their time in? Because they think they're sort of too good to be in that position. I don't think it's been a great look. I don't think he's played particularly well since then. I'm
No.
not saying the two things are 100% linked, but I just think he's one that I'd be looking at thinking there is a talented player there, but
Mhm.
it's a little bit of a red flag the way he's played kind of in this crunch part of the season when it's actually mattered. He was dropped for the game at Newcastle last week in what was a must-win game, and I know they end up getting a draw out of it, but if you're not playing in those sorts of games, your team needs to win. You're 2 games from relegation. It's not the best look, and it's not a particularly good indictment of you or your character. So, a little bit of a question mark around him for me.
Yeah. I think we've covered Leicester. It is sad to see them go because they were. I did like them. I still think you're delighted that they've gone there.
No, to be honest, mate.
Secretly.
No, I think my issue with Leicester at the time was I thought that actually a lot of the praise they got was it was an opportunity to indirectly dig Arsenal out, and it's less about Leicester and them themselves. Their
Yeah.
fans are going to be happy with the position they're in, and they're going to give it large. Like
Hmm.
that's football. I totally get it. I think what I didn't like at the time was they had to have 2 good seasons, and we had exceptionally bad seasons in that period, and it
Hmm.
was very much they've replaced us in the top 6. You thought, well, they haven't replaced anyone, and I'm not just being wise off the event. It's 2 seasons. Like
Yeah.
you have to lay a solid decade and probably decade after that of groundwork before you can sort of turn around and say we've superseded another club with our achievements and our sort of standing in the game.
Hmm.
That was all that bothered me at the time. I think I remember saying at the start of last season that I thought we'd finish above them, and we obviously did. And part of that was because I thought we would get better, and part of
Hmm.
it was I thought, well, and this isn't just Leicester. This applies to it might be Brighton at the moment, or it might have been
Hmm.
Southampton 10 years ago when they were sort of up there and doing really well for their standing within the English game. But I think you can only succeed at the top level when you're competing with
Hmm.
like the elite level established clubs, which
Hmm.
who have simply put more money than you, more finances, more of a global standing. You can
Hmm.
only kind of cheat the system for so long. I'm not saying that means that I expected them to get relegated,
Hmm.
but I thought kind of their 5 minutes of fame, if you want to kind of call it that,
Hmm.
that was kind of all it would be at the time. They were in a purple patch. They had a good group of players at the time. The manager was doing well, but like kind of with anything and any club at that level, I thought there would be an expiry date on it all, and it came a bit sooner than I thought. But I don't wish them any harm. I think, as you said, they've been good in the Premier League. Like fair
Hmm.
play to them, winning a league and winning an FA Cup. Like I think they would have taken that certainly if he
No.
offered them that position
David
kind of when they
Lineker said
came
that.
up. Yeah, and I
It,
understand why he said it. It's perspective because they've kind of elevated themselves so kind of quickly following that first season where it was a miracle they stayed up.
it,
They then won the league the next year. So then it's sort of like, okay, well, what is their true level? Like, are they going to be battling relegation, or are they kind of not a title or anything, but are they kind of a team that's going to be, competing for top six, say,
No.
every year? And it middled off a bit, and they had a few, but they were an established Premier League team. They've not fought relegation since that first, or they hadn't fought relegation
No.
since that first season that they were in the league. So it is a surprise, no doubt about it. It is a surprise to see them go.
So then we come to Leeds. Leeds does feel like they've they've kind of got what they deserve in the end. They I feel like it's just like a year ago they had Bielsa, and then they've ended up with Big Sam. Like that just like shows
Yeah, FJC said
like
that, didn't he? And he's right. It shows muddled thinking. It shows, a sort of confliction of different strategies. And you spoke to the point earlier about having a strategy and having the right strategy. Like it needs to be coherent. Firstly, I think you sort of need to the path you're kind of going to go down needs to be, followed by everyone at the club, because it's no good saying, well, we're going to play one way, but we're going to recruit players to play in another way, and there's just kind of no coherence between any of it. I think the problem you've sort of had is they thought, obviously, when they got rid of Bielsa, they were getting a sort of tailor-made replacement in Jesse Marsh in terms of what he would bring with the football he plays, the intensity he brings, and it just was not that whatsoever.
no.
It was, I would say, it was a disastrous appointment, really, from the offset. And I think that they got out of trouble last year. I think they had someone in Rafinha who, you compare to all the other relegation teams at the time, was a genuine match winner, which the other
Yeah.
teams just did not have. Burnley didn't have that, which was who they were up against, realistically. And I'd say he got them out of it more than Jesse Marsh. If you look at those games where he scored on the last day of the season against Brentford, and he sets the goal up against Norwich on a plate for the young kid.
Yeah.
Like, there was a couple of games where it was him. It wasn't Jesse Marsh. They survived you could even argue, in spite of him and his tactics. Now then they go into the summer and they obviously recruit heavily for his style, but I'm not sure they were ever completely in on him as a character and as a manager. So you've sort of given him what he wants, but you're not really sure he's that good. And he wasn't that good at the time. It always felt like he was a couple of games from the sack, obviously pre-World Cup, and he kind of got through, I'd say more by luck than judgment, if I'm honest. I think that Liverpool result, you might look back at that one where they won 2-1 at Anfield, and it kind of probably got him a few more weeks in hindsight. I think had they lost that and they didn't go on a particularly good run after that game, I think he would have been out of there a lot sooner. Now, whether that means they would have then ended up having a better season, who knows? But I think he was poor. I think Javi Gracia was a really poor appointment after that, because again, it's sort of, you're bringing in a guy who's quite pragmatic in the way he sets football teams up. Certainly, when you watch what he did with Watford in the Premier League, it was pragmatism. It wasn't, pressing teams off the park, which is what they recruited players to do. And then they obviously panic and end up with Big Sam for the last 4 games, which, as you say, like, you've gone from Bielsa to Big Sam in the space of, best part of 15 months, and you're now in the Championship. It's a mess. And I think Leeds, when I look at the 3 teams that have gone down, Leeds are the one I look at and think they've got the most work to do next season, and certainly sort of in the near future, I think, to come back up. And it doesn't mean just getting rid of players, but I look at them. Southampton, I can see the bones of something. If they can keep that group together, they've got some talented young players. They could do something like a Burnley.
It felt like with Southampton, like, because at times they play some nice stuff. They seem to do better against like the
Big teams.
bigger teams.
Last 4 results, Southampton. Funny you mentioned that. So their last, I say 4 results. Their last 4 points they picked up in the Premier League. 4 draws against Liverpool, Arsenal, Tottenham, Man United. They were their last 4 points for the last 3 months of the season. They lost every other game. So,
and they came bottom against the in that statistic match of the day show. They were bottom of the head to head against the other 6 in the bottom. But yeah, so I you know what, my heart's broken for Bazunu. He has not had a good season. I still can't believe it though, genuinely, because like, if you watch him for Ireland and then watch him for Southampton, it's 2 different players. he did get a save of the season, or sorry, save of the month. I think early on in the season for a great save against Mo Salah, but it didn't quite cut the mustard for him. But I think that whole squad will be better off for a championship. I genuinely think that they'll come back up very quickly. Like that Suleiman guy scored a couple of great goals against Liverpool there. And there's so many. Livramento is back as well. I wouldn't be surprised if somebody comes in for Livramento, maybe because of the big injury he had. Somebody they might be put off by him, but again, as soon as he was back on the pitch, he looked great. If I was a Southampton fan, I wouldn't be too worried. The championship will be tough, especially because there's so many sort of big names in the championship going into next season. But I think they'll be all right because I don't think too many of those guys will move on or be demanded to leave. But you can't say the same thing for Leeds or Leicester. Like there will be a lot of those. I think a lot of the Leeds players, like a lot of the American guys, like Tyler Adams and
This is the
Mark
thing. How
Rucka.
much loyalty to the cause are some of these guys going to have when you've had a window like they had last summer and you've brought these guys in and it's not really worked out?
Like
And obviously, some of them.
Nanto's Italian international. Like players like him, I imagine they might just about keep him, but there's so many guys that came in with a bit of hype, and I wonder will they be demanding to leave. I see Aronson already has a relegation release clause, as probably is normal for whenever you're signing for a bottom half team, but yeah, I think there'll be a high turnover there. They've got a couple of youngsters that like maybe they'll do all right in the championship. But I think you're right. It just seems there's so much up in the air for Leeds. That they have to have a high turnover of like staff, because they need another new director of football now, and then so they're basically going to have to create a whole new plan, a whole new philosophy, start from scratch, and go again.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's just an awful lot of work and an awful lot of decisions that you have to get right for you to start trending in the right direction. But
Yes, they've got a lot to do there. And they took it to the last day last season and survived. And you could argue they didn't learn their lessons from that.
yeah.
And it's a harsh sport. If you stand still and other teams get better, you get punished.
This is the overall point I'm gonna come on to, is that this season just shows the level I think that the Premier League has got to. You not only now do you have to like you have to spend money, but not only that, you have to get it. You have to absolutely nail it, because I don't think any team that stayed up, or I think all. I was just having a quick look. I can't see a single team that had a summer transfer spend that was positive.
No.
I can't. And I've just been flicking through the teams in the bottom half, but even the likes of Bournemouth, minus 22, but the teams that went down, let me get Leeds up. Leeds, minus 4 million. So compared to Bournemouth in the summer, their net spend was a quarter of what Bournemouth was roughly. And then who else was it? Leicester, as we were talking about. I think Leicester were one of the only teams that were in the profit. They were plus 60 million, and that was maybe to make up for the previous summer transfer window.
Yeah.
And then finally Southampton were minus 70, but they bought potential. They didn't buy players for the here and now. The other common trend between the teams that went down were, as I've sort of said, the goalkeepers weren't good enough. The sadly for Bazunu, he will come good. I still stand by it.
Yeah.
But he wasn't good enough this season. Too early for him. And
Melia and Ward.
Melia, and then
I think they might
Leicester.
even be
So
the bottom 3 for post-shot XG though, so they're certainly
I
right
would have
down there.
thought so. Yeah,
Right down there, all of them. They're in the teens, I think, for the negative teens for the post-shot XG, which I don't love stats for goalkeepers, but over the course of the season, it tells you that they're not keeping
yeah,
the ball out the net enough. Obviously, Big Sam ended up dropping Medlia for the last 4 games, which
yeah.
tells you probably all you need to know. Again, in the crunch part of the season, your first choice keeper isn't your first choice
Mhm.
keeper, and he's being replaced by a journeyman. So
And
yeah,
then you look at the teams that were down there but managed to stay up. Like Nottingham Forest, like everybody was laughing at them, going like they're after signing like 23. Was it 20? Yeah, it was about 23 players, wasn't it?
it was a lot of
I
players
mean,
for
I'm
whatever figure.
scrolling for an awful long time here to get to the bottom of their list of transfers. You
Yeah.
know, it was so or I won't say unorganized, but it was just
It's
mad.
unorthodox, though. I mean, to sign that
Yeah.
many players in one window, and
And then
you could
Lewis
argue because
O'Brien, who they signed, sorry, Lewis O'Brien, he's ended up having to, like, there was no room from the squad. They ended up having to, and then they made a decision late in the window in January. I think he had to then go, I think he's playing for an MLS team now, um, just because they made a decision on him too late.
yeah,
Um, but they've stayed up. And
yeah,
the other trend is you need to stick with your manager. You need to get a good manager. You back them with a load of money and
mm,
make sure they're the good players, and and then back the manager. West
yeah,
Ham are the same. Spent a good bit of money in the window. Um, Stuck with David Moyes, and some of their transfers haven't even quite come off yet, like Scamacca, um, Maxwell Cornet, um, and then they've got Paquetá, who I don't think has maybe lived up to the hype just yet, considering
yeah.
he was a Brazil
Mixed
international,
bag.
and the defender Agurd, like they were unlucky. It was not so much that he's a bad player, but unlucky with the injury.
Yeah.
Um, but then it finally came good in the end for West Ham, and they're in the European final. But yeah, it just shows you, like, you have to get so many things right now at this level. You can't just throw money at the wall and hope it sticks. Um,
No, it's absolutely the margins are so fine. Like it really is brutal. You can spend money. You got to spend it well. You got to have the right people in place to sort of as I say, you got to be coherent
you,
really
you
in
have to
terms
have
of
a full philosophy and
yeah, you have to be all in
and,
on it as well.
and stick to it. It's
Yeah.
it's it's crazy.
And I
And
think at that end of the table, it's very tough when you're talking about relegations are on the line. Like the
mm,
actual punishment for getting it wrong. I mean, Southampton have tried something different this year. They've gone youthful,
yeah,
and it's not worked. And their punishment for that is that they get relegated. You know, so when you're talking about the top teams, trying Chelsea have had a shocking season. They can't have
yeah.
a worse season in their history, and yet
And we're the exact same. Chucked a load of money at it with not much of a plan, but too many players without selling on.
there's a floor
Um,
to it, isn't there? Which is higher than obviously
yeah,
you're not going to get relegated. All jokes aside,
and
so.
the teams that are doing well, like Man City, Arsenal, all have a process. Even Newcastle and
Villa
United,
and Brighton. Well, I'd say, yeah, Brighton.
and then yeah, Brighton are the prime example of this at the moment. Like they lose a couple of their best players, lose their manager, but the process, the philosophy is all still there. The recruitment's fantastic, and and they end up doing well.
Yeah,
Um, but yeah, then as we're coming on to it now, Luton are coming up.
yeah,
Congratulations to them, won
yeah.
on penalties. But after what we're after saying, you have to spend a lot of money. Are these teams gonna struggle at the ones that are coming up?
I think
Um,
Luton have to look at Forest and who's the other side? Brentford, and I don't just mean in terms of spending. I think in terms of looking to give yourselves an edge What's kept Forest up this season, apart from their obviously ridiculously high net spend, has been their home form. They've made it a
Yeah.
difficult place to go and get a result, even if the quality isn't always there. I think that's what Luton, I think, will have to lean into, making Kenilworth Road a tough place to go and dig out a result. I think is sort of they need to make that their edge,
Yeah.
because sort of as you point out, like qualitatively, they're not there. I mean, I watched that game and it was decent for an hour, and then both teams were absolutely knackered, and like extra time was just 30 minutes of both teams wanting the game to end and go to penalties. So I think you saw in that game that there's a clear kind of established, obviously, drop off to the
Mhm.
championship, which is to be expected. And I think to sort of make that next step, you need to look for those kind of marginal gains. And
Mhm.
I'm sure they'll look at it. I think that's the most obvious one to me is to you've got to be looking at your home form, and making it a tough place to go, getting the crowd as sort of a 12th man. And that's before you even talk about any transfer dealings. And it sounds easy on paper. Like if every team could do it, every team would do
Yeah.
it. But it's just the sort of like softer side of it that you lean into with the fans, get them on side. They'll know it. They're not daft. They're not been in the Premier League for the best part of 4 decades. They know that it's not easy to get back there,
Mhm.
and they'll need to give everything to stay there. But congrats to them.
Yeah. No, it's gonna be really interesting seeing how they do. It's nice to see a team that hasn't been in it, as you say, for decades. We've got Sheffield United and Burnley as well, and Burnley look like they'll be a fun team to watch as well. I saw a couple of people not too hopeful for Sheffield United, but we'll see what they do in the window. We can't look put our nose up at the promoted teams anymore. All three have stayed up this season, um, and
Absolutely,
they've
which
kind of
is
had different
predicted.
strategies as well. Like Bournemouth, I don't know how Gary O'Neill hasn't been put up for manager of the season. I think
Yeah,
the job he's done is just incredible.
yeah,
Um, I think maybe it's because Fulham and Marco Silva have done a bit better, but I think that what he had to go into was a lot harder than what Marco Silva. I suppose that's easy to say in hindsight, but everybody had Bournemouth down,
yeah,
and then they didn't have a good start to the season.
yeah.
Um, and it wasn't good whenever the manager Scott Parker at the time was saying, "Yeah, no, I need more quality here. There isn't enough."
Yeah, this lot aren't very good.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so that's the Premier League for another season. Thank God, as a Chelsea fan, I'm hoping Pochettino has just been announced officially, which is good. But have you got any other thoughts to wrap up the season, Harry?
No, I think that going into it on the last day, everything else was sorted, wasn't it? We sort of knew who obviously
Hmm.
the top four was sorted, the title was sorted. We knew that Brighton were going to be in the Europa. I suppose the only thing, Aston Villa wrapped up conference with a good win over Brighton. So,
Yeah.
congrats to them. And Unai Emery's done a very good job. He's done it in Unai Emery fashion. I did see today that he's, along with Lopetegui, got the biggest over performance, unexpected points
Yeah,
since he came in. So I've seen it all before, basically, with Emery and kind of that side of it, but he gets
yeah.
results. So
I, I,
fair
I
play to
think
him.
I think at the time whenever he was there, I'm sort of thinking it. I just think there's a ceiling to Emery. He's perfect for now, but I think the ambitions that Aston Villa's
Well, this is
owners
the
have,
thing. Yeah.
I think there is a ceiling to Emery's methods, but he'll it'll be good for. I think it'll be good for another season. Um,
Yeah, and then they've got the conference next year. Obviously, it'd be
yeah.
interesting to see how they go in that. I mean, I think they're a better side than the West Ham team that's in the final this year. I think it'd be fair to say West Ham, but obviously, going to finish season 14th. So Villa can be looking at that and thinking, well, we're a better 11 with that.
Mhm.
We've got a manager of European pedigree, so good opportunity for them to win a trophy next year. I would think, and I'm with you. I think it's sort of long term. He's a manager that has his limitations, but
Mhm.
you can't argue that across several jobs, he's Arsenal and PSG aside, he's extracted kind of the absolute maximum out of multiple clubs
Mhm.
and squads. So he deserves credit for that. And you look at the position he came into Aston Villa under. They were obviously battling relegation at the time, even if people thought they'd
Mhm.
get out of it. And he's done that and obviously taken them even further on. So fair play to him for that.
Yeah. So we've got we'll come on to the Bundesliga very briefly, and then we're going to go through the predictions. Dortmund have bottled it. Now, are you kind of glad to see this side just take some of the spotlight off of the Gunners?
It's interesting, right? Like, if you were going to choose sort of a way to lose it, I would certainly rather do what we've done, where it's kind of this slow implosion. And don't get me wrong, it's painful. And actually, you could argue it's worse in terms of losing more games and being further off it.
Yeah.
I mean, it was just so typical of Man City to sort of like throw the last two games so it sort of looks like semi-close, kind of, even though, like, had they had to win either of those games, I'm absolutely certain they would have won one of those.
Oh,
But, like, that's
the
besides the
sides
point.
they put out were a lot less. Credit to Brentford, actually, just what we're touching
Yeah,
that.
a
They've
double
done
over
the
them,
double,
yeah.
which is just
Yeah.
like so good. They're
Yeah,
annoyingly good
fair
Brentford.
play. Fair play. No, fair play to Brentford. Great season. Like, full respect for that. But I think in terms of Dortmund, like, it did make me feel better about ours, because what I will say is, if you're sort of comparing the two, obviously Man City are a lot better than Bayern Munich. They beat them in the Champions League. Like, they've been remarkably consistent in the league up to the point where they've actually, like, already wrapped it up. Bayern Munich haven't been. They've been really patchy under Tuchel in all competitions. And if you're looking at Dortmund, like, it was on a plate for them, really. And you're playing a team on the last day in Mainz who I think they'd lost their previous 4 going into it, or they'd lost the previous 3. It was something like that. They had no sort of form to speak of, and sometimes that can be dangerous. You get a team with almost nothing to play for on the last day, and it's sort of, well, they could be on the beach, but they could also be there playing with no pressure and sort of out to spoil the party, which is exactly how it obviously ended up transpiring. That is a sickener, isn't it? I mean, it really is. If you've not won the league since 2012, you're going into it, you need to win one game at home. They've been brilliant at home all season, Dortmund.
Yeah.
I think there's something like 14 wins, a draw, and a loss going into it on Saturday. And
Mine's. I'm just looking. Yeah, they had 1 win in their last 6.
Yeah.
And that included, 1 win in their last 5, and the rest they'd lost the other 4.
Yeah.
And then the draw with Dortmund.
Yeah. It's a sickener. It's an absolute sickener. So, that is the worst way to lose a title for me. I'd be absolutely distraught if that was us. And
Haller missed the penalty.
it just, the
like
whole
you,
thing
you
was,
draw the game, you get a last minute equalizer, and it could have been the winner, and they lose it on goal difference. It's
and Brighton. I keep saying Brighton, Bayern. They won it late. They did leave it late. Jamal Musiala with a peach of a goal, really. Got Tuchel out of jail, really, because let's call it for what it's been. He's not been good there since he's gone there. Really, he's taken them out of the Champions League, out of the German Cup, and scraped the title on the last day. Kind of stumbled over the finish line. Really, it's all kind of fallen into their lap, and it's tough for Dortmund to take that. Really tough.
It is, and what's funny is about it as well is, like, Bayern have sacked Oliver Kahn, and I can't remember the other guy's name, the other sporting director. Like, Bayern, in typical sort of, well, I was going to say German fashion, but it's more just Bayern Munich fashion. Their expectations are so high that they're like, no, winning the league isn't good enough. We did not win the league well enough. It was out of our hands, and therefore there has to be changes.
On the repercussions, absolutely.
Which is just like, it's absolutely incredible that you can win the league and then have for it to go that way. But
for the league, it's not a great thing, if I'm honest, because I think that it would have been better to have a different winner. Because you look at it there, Bayern have had a poor season, really, by their standards. They've had a poor season. It's been tumultuous there. They've changed managers mid-season, and they've still won the league. And you look at that and think, well, how do you stop something like that happening again? And I think with Dortmund, if you're sort of like looking at it on a wider scale, like, they obviously are seen as a stepping stone club now, where you go if you're sort of a Haaland or obviously a Jude Bellingham, as it's going to be this summer. You could argue Jadon Sancho, even though it's not gone well for him since he went to Man United, it's sort of same sort of thing. You go there to develop your career to a point that you then feel like you're moving to a quote unquote bigger club and a club where you can then win trophies, which I get it on one hand because it means you sort of attract all sorts of talent kind of, pre their peak.
Yeah.
But then it feels like, again, there's kind of a ceiling to it all. And players actually go there with this attitude like, yeah, I'm just there to develop and then I'll go to a proper club. And I think that's just sort of a dangerous mindset to have your playing squad getting into. And you can see why with that attitude, they haven't won the league for, 11 years and counting now. So, not to stick the boot in, but it's tough for them to take that, definitely.
I think it's slightly harsh just because what you're going to end up with better players if you're getting ones that are ambitious. So they might see you as a stepping stone, but they still had one of the best midfielders in the world at the moment in Jude Bellingham.
I get it.
Like, what are you going to do? Get a guy that's sort of like going to sign a few soy checks or something like that. So players that they're getting their peak at Dortmund.
It's not the sort of thing that gets fixed quickly. It's sort of entire cultural reset at the club where it's an attitude of like, you don't come here to then go to Bayern Munich. You come here to win trophies here. Like, we are here to compete with them. And you might look at the actual kind of makeup of the division and, obviously fan involvement and Bayern Munich being by far the most profitable team there and the most successful team there, and think, well, that's just kind of the actual natural order of the league. But I just look at it and think, if you're not winning stuff and you can't even win stuff when your biggest rivals aren't on it at all, there's a reason for that. And it's just the most obvious thing to me when I look at them and their club DNA. That's kind of what they've become. And I'm not saying it's sort of a completely useless concept, because they, as you said, they still attract good players. It's in the Champions League every year. But it's just whether you can kind of go any further operating like that.
We've put it off long enough, Harry. I think it's now time to come to our predictions.
We have.
You do this one, yeah. I think maybe just point out a few highlights. We'll put them up on Twitter, but put out a few highlights of all four of our picks and sadly, or more importantly, the lowlights. What I always say about this is, if you think we've had bad predictions, that's fine, but I want to see yours. Not everybody does this. We're putting our credibility on the line. So if anybody's nailed this, please reply to us on Twitter. We'll do a post about this as this podcast is going out. Respond to it. What did you predict, and where did you put it on Twitter? Have you got the proof that you predicted it before the season? Be interesting to see if anybody else has done better. I'm saying that because mine were atrocious, Harry.
You've been putting it off. Yeah, I'm just looking at my calculations here. So just to explain to the viewers what I've been getting up to. I feel like Carol Vorderman looking at this. I've crunched the numbers.
You haven't got a nice enough one for that, Harry.
No, quite. Yeah, I know. Yeah. But in any case, we've got Fergal's predictions here. We've got his predicted, got the actuals, got the difference between them, and we've added them all up. So, yeah, bottom of the table again, Fergal, unfortunately, mate. 92 was your score. So, a little bit of a struggle there, mate. You did get Man City bang on, so fair play to you for that one.
Yeah.
The sort of unfortunate part of that is so did everyone else.
Yeah.
We all predicted Man City to win the league. You did get Nottingham Forest spot on in 16th. You were one off with Everton in 17th. However, and this is what's potentially let you down in the standings here, Newcastle, you were 9 off. You had them 13th. Leicester,
that's a shocker in hindsight. Absolute shocker.
I think Newcastle, though, like in retrospect, like we all were a bit similar. It was like they were very good in the second half of last season.
Yeah.
But it was whether that was then going into a new season and with new expectations of kind of kicking on, would they be able to sustain that? And they have, and some,
Well,
and fair play to them.
everybody thought that Spurs were going to be really good. Like they had what was perceived to be a good transfer window, and
Yeah,
Conte was still had the reputation of being a great manager, too good for Spurs. So it's
yeah,
been a crazy season.
it certainly has, and sort of no more so than the relegation, as we spoke about.
Yeah,
Leicester is a big one for you here. You had them 8th, they finished 18th, so
I
that's a
just
difference
thought
of
the good
10.
times were going to keep on
And you're
coming for them.
optimistic with Leeds as a Chelsea fan, which
It's because my
unforgivable,
dad
really.
supports them. I always end up giving them too much of a bias and thinking
Yeah,
they're so good, but
yeah,
whenever you actually see them play, you go, God, the
yeah.
defend against Spurs at the weekend was
Terrible.
dreadful.
Terrible. Absolutely awful. Chelsea were a mile off, which we all were. I just don't know how you could have predicted Chelsea. I think at the start of the season, there was this sort of conception they could have a tricky season.
Like I
Obviously, they still
knew
had
there
two
was going
strong
to be a bad
players.
season, and it was kind of like my bias and pride just put them in. I think I put them in fourth, was it?
Third. So, yeah, Chelsea in
Third.
third, which I think we all did, aside from Ali had them lower. But yeah, I think we.
I listened back to what I had to say about them, and I was quite negative. And it's one of those ones. If you heard what I said, and then you heard that I put them in third, it's like, where did I get
Yeah,
third from with what I was saying? But that's just my bias. I need to try and lose that going into next season.
yeah, too
Chelsea
optimistic.
and Leeds bias has ruined me.
Too optimistic. So that left you fourth. 92 is your overall score in terms of the difference of where teams finished from where you predicted
Hmm.
them, which left you, unfortunately, well, you're in the Champions League spots, so
Yeah.
you've scraped into it. You
I,
might have to go through a qualifying round, but you're in the Champions League. You're in fourth. George was third, so not a great season for the Chelsea boys. He also predicted Man City to win the league, so he did get one exactly right. He had Crystal Palace exactly right in 11th, but that was about as good as it got. Again, way off the mark with Chelsea. Fulham, which we all struggle with in fairness. I don't think anyone foresaw Fulham coming 10th in the league, so great season from them. You've got to
yeah.
give them respect for that. Leicester, George was 8 off the mark, which I think none of us had them that low. And obviously Chelsea. Chelsea let them down badly. So that left George with 84, which, well, considerably better than Fergal, but not quite good enough to finish in the top two, which brings us on. Drum roll, please. Ali second, and I haven't fudged the numbers here to just make myself the winner. Ali in second with an overall score of 80. The big one here, Leeds United. Predicted them 9th, they finished 19th. It's absolutely killed him because Ali actually had a few spot on here, not just Man City. He had Crystal Palace spot on. He was one off the mark with Forest. Even his prediction of Everton in the relegation zone wasn't a million miles off, but it sticks out like a sore thumb. He's predicted Leeds to finish 9th. They finished 19th, and that's cost him, unfortunately, in terms of going for it. He also had Fulham too high up. He had Chelsea. He was more conservative with Chelsea, predicted them 5th, so maybe foresaw a little bit of what was coming, but wasn't quite good enough to topple me, stop me retaining my crown from last season. I've done it again, and I must be honest, I think I was better last season. We'll have to go back and check the numbers on this.
I'd
I feel
imagine
like
so. This season, there's been so many teams that have dropped off a cliff that
with this one, like we couldn't have predicted some of these. I do honestly truly believe that. I mean,
yeah.
nobody had Bournemouth staying up. Nobody had them staying up, albeit it's only ended up being a difference of 5. But I just don't know how you could have foreseen that after the
Newcastle in
first
the
4
top four,
games.
as we've already said.
Newcastle in the top
Leicester
4.
going
I
down.
had them 8th, which was slightly better than your maybe negative 13th that you had them. But even then, that wasn't brave enough, really. I think the difference for me here, I did back Villa, and I remember saying at the time, I don't remember why, but I backed them for 9th and they finished 7th, whereas you guys had them a bit lower. Brighton, albeit I don't like them very much, but I've resisted the temptation to stick them in the relegation zone like at the start of last season.
Mhm.
And then the relegation candidates, Everton and Leeds and Nottingham Forest, all finished within 4 of where I predicted them to. And so just a cleaner overall card. Nothing spectacular here. 75 points for me overall. So beating Ali by 5 in the end. The Leeds one is the big swing for him. He's going to regret that one. He's going to regret trusting all those Americans, whether it's the manager, whether it's the actual signings they brought in. He was too optimistic with what they were doing there, and it's cost you. So if you're listening to this, Ali, unlucky son. What can I say?
Bad luck
You've got too
next
much
time.
faith in your own nation.
Annoyingly, I would have won the league this year with the amount of points I got.
Yeah, beating Pep Guardiola's Man City in 92-point haul.
Anyway, moving on. We'll very swiftly. We'll come to short king of the week.
Yeah.
Who are you going for, Harry?
So I went through all the games, as I should do. Do your due diligence. The only person I could find 5'9" or under that scored this weekend, I thought was worth a shout, was Douglas Luiz for Aston Villa, and I actually think he's been very good in the sort of the last.
I think he
6,
got
7
their
weeks.
player of the season.
Yeah, he's been good. I mean, you got to give it to him. Obviously, Arsenal were interested in him in the summer. I didn't think he was all that, if I'm honest. He's obviously since signed a new deal at Villa, and he's had a good season for them. Certainly, I think I'm receptive to the idea that he might have been a decent player for us. He's certainly been decent for Villa, as you say, player of the season there, which they've had some good performances this season, so that's no mean feat to be winning that.
Yeah.
So yeah, he's my nomination this week.
Yeah, the only one I could think of was Lucas Moura, but he's Spurs, so
Yeah,
let's give it to Douglas Luiz.
You'd be better off just saying you couldn't think of anyone, if I'm honest, mate, than nominating a Spurs player and it not being in jest. Shocking.
Yeah.
Shocking shout. Absolutely shocking shout from you there. Unacceptable.
No, sorry. I
said that.
I can't believe I said on top of those bad predictions. I need to come back next season a bit stronger.
I know. Yeah, get away over the summer, recharge the batteries, and you come back stronger.
Head's gone. I've lost my own dressing room, and by that I mean I lost my mind. With those predictions.
Easily done.
It can be in this topsy turvy world. It can be done. That brings us to the end of the Premier League season. We'll probably we're not too sure. We're going to do our awards, so I don't know if we'll do maybe 2 more podcasts or maybe just 1 and wrap up all the finals and do our awards then. We'll see, but that's our Premier League coverage, analysis, punditry, whatever you want to call what we do in this podcast. I don't think I can claim any of those titles. Maybe waffle would be more appropriate. But that's the end of this episode. We'll see you again for maybe 1 or 2 more this season. Harry, congratulations on your title.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm off to celebrate, mate. Thank you very much.
Goodbye.